Marguerite Olsen had been working the galley of Flight 218 for 11 years, and in all that time she had never seen a flight attendant speak to a passenger the way Ron Castile spoke to the woman in 2A. "Ma'am, I need you to gather your things and move to the back," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "This seat's been reassigned." The woman in 2A looked up slowly. She was perhaps 60, dressed plainly in a gray cardigan, a canvas tote at her feet, reading glasses pushed up into close-cropped silver hair. She didn't argue. She didn't even look surprised. She simply folded the corner of the page she'd been reading and closed the book. "May I see the reassignment?" she asked. Her voice was even, almost gentle. "It's a system thing," Roan said, already reaching for the overhead bin above her seat. "Happens sometimes. Coach has plenty of room." Marguerite, 2 rows back with a tray of welcome drinks, felt the air in the cabin shift. The other first-class passengers, a man in a rumpled suit, a young couple with matching headphones, had gone quiet, watching sideways the way people do when they don't want to be caught watching. "I booked this seat 4 months ago," the woman said. "I have the confirmation." "I'm sure you do." Roan's smile didn't move past his mouth. "But we've got a situation, and I need this seat for someone who actually needs it." He said it like that, someone who actually needs it, and Marguerite saw the woman's jaw tighten, just slightly, the only sign that the words had landed at all. Then the woman reached for her tote, unhurried, and stood. "Of course," she said. "Lead the way." That should have been the end of it. A small cruelty, swallowed, the kind that happens on planes more often than anyone likes to admit. But as the woman stepped into the aisle, Roan put a hand lightly on the seat back, not on her, never on her, and said, loud enough for the row behind to hear, "Some people just don't read the room." Marguerite set the tray down on the service cart so hard a cup tipped over. The woman didn't go far. Roan walked her 3 rows back to economy, to a middle seat between 2 strangers, and gestured for her to sit as if he were doing her a favor. She thanked him, actually thanked him, and folded herself into the seat with her tote on her lap, taking out her book again as though nothing at all had happened. But Marguerite had seen the boarding manifest that morning, the way she saw it every flight, scrolling past names and seat numbers on the tablet clipped to the galley wall. And something about the name in 2A had stuck with her, the way an odd word sticks in your ear before you place where you've heard it. Voss. She pulled the tablet now, scrolled to seat 2A, and there it was. Voss, priority/corporate. No further detail. The airline's manifest system never gave more than that. Corporate flags were common, mid-level managers flying on comp tickets all the time. It didn't have to mean anything. Except Marguerite had been to the company town hall 18 months ago, the big one in the hangar at headquarters, where the new ownership group had been introduced after the merger. She remembered a slide. A name under a small, unsmiling photograph. Elena Voss, Chief Operating Officer, Holloway Air Group. She looked again at the woman in seat 34B, reading her book as if she had nowhere else in the world to be, and felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Roan," she said, finding him in the aft galley restocking ice. "Can I ask you something?" "If it's about 2A, no." He didn't look up. Guy in 2A was the regional sales director for Orlane Freight, biggest cargo contract we've got, and he called ahead, said his assistant got bumped to coach by mistake and he wanted her moved up so they could go over numbers. I fixed it. That's the job. The seat wasn't empty, Roan. There was a passenger in it. There's always a passenger in it. He shrugged, snapping ice into a bin. She didn't make a fuss. People who make a fuss, that's a problem. She wasn't a problem. Did you check who she was? Why would I need to? He finally looked at her, and there was something almost amused in his face, like he couldn't quite believe she was making this into a thing. Marguerite, I've been doing this 12 years. I know how to read a cabin. That woman back there, gray cardigan, paperback, flying alone in coach clothes in a first-class seat, that's somebody whose company upgraded her by accident, or whose points cleared when they shouldn't have. The guy in the suit, on the phone the second he sat down, talking about freight tonnage, that's a passenger who matters to this airline. I made a call. It was the right call. It wasn't your call to make it all, Marguerite said quietly. And her name is on the manifest as E. Voss. Corporate flag. So's half of coach, on a leisure fare with a corporate code attached for the discount. Means nothing. He zipped the ice bin shut. Look, if it bothers you, write it up after we land. Right now we've got a cabin to run. Marguerite didn't write it up after they landed. She didn't have to. Somewhere over the Sierra foothills, the seatbelt sign came on for turbulence, and the captain's voice came over the cabin speakers with the usual calm instructions. Then, a moment later, a second announcement, unscheduled, and addressed to one specific seat. MS. Voss, in seat 34B, Captain Reyes would like to extend his apologies for the seating mix-up this morning, and would welcome you to the flight deck for a few minutes once we're through this rough patch, if you're willing. The cabin went very still. Marguerite, strapped into her jump seat near the rear galley, watched the woman in 34B look up from her book, glance once toward the front of the plane, and nod, to no one in particular, simply acknowledging that she'd heard. In the row ahead, the man in the rumpled suit, the one who had been on the phone about freight tonnage since boarding, turned slowly around in his seat, his face draining of color in stages, like a man watching a number on a screen click from green to red. Voss, he said, to no one. Voss. Roan, walking the aisle with a trash bag for the turbulence cleanup, stopped dead in the middle of the cabin. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, holding the bag, staring at the back of a gray cardigan 3 rows from where he'd put her. They landed 40 minutes later. By the time the seatbelt sign chimed off, word had already moved through the cabin crew the way it does, quiet, fast, unmistakable. Elena Voss wasn't a mid-level manager on a comp ticket. She was the chief operating officer of Holloway Air Group, the parent company that had absorbed this airline in last year's merger, the person 2 levels above the regional vice presidents, the person whose signature was on the policy manual every crew member was supposed to follow. She had been flying, unannounced, on a personal trip to visit her mother, the kind of flight she took quietly, on purpose, specifically so she could see how the airline actually treated its passengers when nobody important was supposed to be watching. Marguerite stood near the forward door as passengers filed off, and watched Elena Voss pause at row 2, where the man from Orlane Freight was gathering his bag with the particular haste of someone who wanted to be anywhere else. "You're the gentleman who needed the seat," Elena said. Not a question. Pleasant, even. "Ma'am, Ms. Voss, I had no idea." "I know you didn't," she said. "That's rather the point." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The men mumbled something and moved quickly toward the jet bridge, and Elena Voss turned, instead, toward the galley, toward Roan, who was standing very straight with his hands folded in front of him, the posture of a man trying to look smaller than he was. "You're the one who reassigned my seat this morning," she said. "Ms. Voss, yes. I am. And I want to say, I had no way of knowing." "You're right," she said. "You had no way of knowing who I was. That's not the problem." She let that sit for a moment, and the cabin, what was left of it, the last few rows of passengers still gathering bags, went quiet again, the way it had gone quiet that morning. "The problem," she said, "is that you decided, on sight, that the woman in the gray cardigan with the paperback book didn't belong in that seat, and that the men on the phone did. You didn't check a manifest. You didn't ask a single question. You looked at 2 people for about 4 seconds and made a judgment about which one mattered, and then you acted on it, out loud, in front of a full cabin, and you told her it was because some people don't read the room. I was only trying to accommodate a contract client, I didn't mean." "I'm sure you didn't mean anything by it," Elena said, and for the first time there was something almost sad in her voice. "That's usually how it goes. Nobody means anything by it. And then a woman gets moved out of a seat she paid for, with no paperwork, no explanation she's entitled to, and a comment about reading rooms, and she says thank you, and goes and sits down, because that's what people learn to do." Marguerite, watching from the galley, saw Roan open his mouth and then close it again, because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't make it worse. "I'd like the seating change log for this flight," Elena said, turning to Marguerite instead, her tone shifting back to something brisk and businesslike. "Not to discipline anyone in the aisle, that's not how we do things here. But this airline has a written policy on seat reassignment, and it exists for exactly this reason, so that decisions like the one made this morning don't get made on instinct, by one person, based on what someone is wearing." "Of course, Ms. Voss," Marguerite said, already reaching for the tablet. What followed happened the way these things are supposed to happen, not in the aisle, not in front of anyone, but properly, through the channels built for it. Elena Voss didn't say another word to Roan Castile after that. She thanked the crew for the flight, walked into the terminal, and was gone within minutes, just another traveler with a canvas tote, heading toward the parking shuttle. But the seating change log went, that same afternoon, to the airline's customer standards office, the department whose entire job was to review exactly this kind of unauthorized reassignment, the ones that happened, as a favor, off the books, without documentation. And when the review came back 3 days later, it found what the cabin had already half known. A first-class passenger had been removed from a seat she'd purchased, without consent, without paperwork, and in violation of 3 separate provisions of the airline's own passenger rights policy, based, the report noted carefully, on nothing but the flight attendant's personal assessment of which passenger appeared to belong there. Roan Castile was placed on administrative leave the following Monday, pending a formal review by the Standards Board, the same process, the company made a point of noting, that applied to every crew member, regardless of seniority. 2 weeks later, his employment was terminated for cause. There was no announcement, no public statement. Just a name quietly removed from the crew roster, and a new line added to the training manual under Seat Reassignment Protocol, a line that hadn't been there before, requiring written passenger consent and a documented reason, logged and reviewable, for any change made in flight. Marguerite heard, much later, that Elena Voss had personally requested that addition. Not as punishment. As prevention. Marguerite flew that same route again 6 weeks later, same aircraft, same early departure, a different first officer in the cockpit. She found herself, out of habit, glancing at seat 2A as she did her boarding count, half expecting, absurdly, to see a gray cardigan and a paperback. The seat was empty until a young man in a wrinkled t-shirt sat down in it, looking faintly disbelieving of his own boarding pass, like he'd been upgraded by some glitch he didn't dare question. Marguerite smiled at him, took his coat to hang, and said nothing at all about who belonged where. She thought about it once more, near the end of the flight, watching the cabin lights dim for landing, how an entire morning's worth of judgment had rested on 4 seconds and a cardigan, how close it had come to simply being absorbed, the way so many small unkindnesses are, into the ordinary noise of a Tuesday flight. And how it hadn't been, in the end, because one woman had argued, or raised her voice, or needed to be anyone at all to deserve the seat she'd paid for, but because she had simply waited, with her book and her dignity intact, for the truth to do the work that shouting never could. The seat belonged to whoever held the ticket. It always had. It had just taken the right person, on the wrong day, to make the airline finally write that down.